Okay, so basically what we want to cover are looking at the two tools that are available in this area. And we think it's important to really help clarify the difference. One of them's been around for a while, the other one's fairly new. And then importantly, talk about what makes sense, to use, and then what would be a great way to apply the information. So as you may know, Kentucky is considered a high graduation state. We're at 88.6% right now in terms of graduation, and we've been celebrated actually for really starting to close the gap with our students in poverty and in terms of graduation. And as you know, things vary widely by district, and also importantly, what I think is really important to point out is the range. So while we have some districts actually and schools with a rate of 100% graduation, we also have one at the lowest. So this range here at the bottom is looking at, we have a school right now where the official graduation rate is 64%. And that does not include the alternative programs. Similarly, we know equity is a very important issue. And if we look at our graduation rate by group, we see right now Asian students are faring the best at 93%, and limited English proficient and students in special education right now have the lowest graduation rate at the state level overall. And again, pointing out the range at the school level, and all of this information I want to point out is in the supplemental data set. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But what this range means is that these groups that you see, white, poor, male, black students, special ed, we have a school in Kentucky where one of these groups is graduating at a rate of 10%, and then we have other groups graduating at a rate of 100%. So just understanding the importance of, everybody knowing not just what your overall graduation rate is, but what's going on with the groups in your school and in your district. And so one great place to get some of that information, both graduation and dropout, importantly, is in the supplemental data set under learning environment. So I encourage you to go explore that. I think a really important Excel file that you can download looks at dropouts from 7th grade on. So we just acknowledging that there are some students in middle schools dropping out, and many of them do come back, but just really the importance of being aware of what's going on in your school and district, not just what's on the state report card, but in this supplemental data set. In terms of the research, there's been many, many decades of research done on students that drop out. We feel this is important to share for context before we get to the nitty-gritty of the tools. But this is basically typology. So these are multiple studies that look at the typology of students that drop out, and basically looking at, there's 4 basic categories. And I just want to point out this area, the last column here, that look at quiet. So these are students who, and we'll link this to the actual data tools we're going to talk about. There are some students that, there's no indication in the data of that they're at risk for dropping out. And when I did an analysis in a large district longitudinally, it was about 10% of the student population that we would consider quiet dropouts. The other thing I want to point out is some of the language here is a little bit deficit laden, like maladjusted, and we want to acknowledge that, becoming a trauma-informed institution, that the strengths of our students and the challenges that they face and why they are on a path to drop out sometimes. Students who drop out, this graph here is really demonstrating, this is a 7 nationally represented studies spanning 5 decades of students on reports of why they drop out. And basically, all the information is collapsed into 3 categories. So pushed out, falling out, and pulled out. And I just want to note, again, this is national research, and half of them are categorized as being pushed out. And again, this is according to students' own reports in the research. This is looking at some of the main core areas within each domain, so pushing out, none of this is surprising, but so there are issues around suspensions, attendance, being pulled out, are kids helping their families with basic survival, getting a job, and then we have falling out. Students who don't have a sense of belonging, who are not feeling engaged. And so really in thinking about this in the context of your district and your school, what do we have, where is your locus of control? What do we have control over that we can help support our students, knowing this is what the research is telling us. And so I know it varies widely by district about what other, what tools and data things are available for you, but we hope that some of these tools that we're going to share in some places that don't have any, I think these are great assets to have in your tool belt. And so the purpose of both of these tools we're talking about is basically helping you identify students in your school and district who are off track to be promoted and at risk of dropping out. And just a reminder, this is one tool in the tool belt, and there's no better data tool than a relationship with a student. Because again, thinking about those quiet students, things that are going on we can't capture. Okay, let's talk about the persistence of graduation report. This has been around for quite a bit. Right now we have about 30% of districts using it, 142 schools across the state. This tool is rooted in the research that we know about what are the risk factors. And so these are the basic categories: demographics, attendance, behavior, and performance. The great thing about this, it uses live data, so that the risk score that you get changes anytime there's a change in any of these indicators. Importantly, pay attention to the scale here. It's really important because these two tools differ in the scale and the direction. So in the persistence, low risk is at the lower the number, the lower the risk, and the higher the number, the higher the risk. And so this is just important when we're comparing these two tools. Won't go through this, but basically if you're interested in how the points, how a student gets a particular score, these are the identifiers in Infinite Campus using current year and prior year data. These are the risk point values given. So it's looking at, in-school removals, suspensions, percent of time missed, and failing grades. Okay, there's two report formats for the persistence tool. One is a PDF, and I'll show you what that looks like, and the other is an Excel CSV file. And we'll talk a little bit about that. A really important caution is only to run these reports after school hours, and they can take a while to run because it's pulling a lot of information, and it can crash your server. Okay, so the PDF report, when we talked to the DPPs, surveyed them, about the majority of them are running this report monthly, and they're running the PDF, not the Excel file. And so for their purposes, maybe this is what is best. And basically, you're getting a summary. So you're going to get the students' information and what their risk value is in each category and overall. But I really, really encourage you to download the Excel file, the CSV, because it allows you to filter and sort, and it gives you a lot more information than just what's on the summary sheet. So if you want to know why a student's risk score is 22, you pull this down and you can look at what is accounting for that score specifically. And it also gives you other indicators that are not on the PDF. For example, are they marked as experiencing homelessness or limited English proficient? And so there's a lot you can do. So we encourage people to kind of get comfortable with, if you're not, with playing with the Excel, because there's a lot of power in this tool. And I'll repeat some things several times, but definitely if you're in elementary or middle, this is the tool that you have at your disposal right now. in high school because the early warning is only available for high school. So some of the strengths is that it clearly gives you the risk factors for each of those main areas, and it's available for every level, and the risk score changes, based on changes happening live in Infinite Campus. In terms of the limitations, it doesn't include other available data points that contribute to risk of dropout. So it's limited somewhat in that way. I just want to make a note of data quality, particularly when it comes to behavior referrals, that data, garbage in, garbage out. So if, say, a particular school's not documenting the behavior referrals, it's not going to reflect in the student's risk score. And so it's really important to, constantly work towards improving data quality to get the best out of the tools. Running the report takes quite a bit of time, and you can't sort within IC, but again, pulling down the Excel file, you can. And then just making sure that one person runs the reports and shares the output in a secure manner with others is important. Here's the path that you get. It's different than the early warning, so it's under state reporting, KDE reports, and then it's called persistence to graduation. All right. So early warning, why another tool? Well, KDE wants the best of the best when it comes to the predictive tools, and there is a lot of work going on in terms of data mining and machine learning, which is a really powerful tool, and we want to keep the persistence to graduation report up while we are pursuing this early warning tool, because again, it's available for elementary and middle, and this early warning tool is powerful, but it's still under development, so we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a link to an overview video that I encourage you to share with the folks in your district and your staff. It's just a nice overview of what the early warning tool is. So basically, it's using, similar to PTG tool, it's using, it's basically creating a grad score and looking at students' likelihood of dropping out. This is the framework that this system is using. It's the powerful thing about this tool is that it's pulling every single indicator that the machine learning and the statistical analyses have shown in Kentucky's Infinite Campus system to predict dropout. So it's looking at school indicators, all the things that we talked about in the PTG, attendance, behavior, grades, household indicators, looking at household size, address changes. And so I want to just point out, importantly, what I think is so powerful about this tool is it picks up changes. So we know Kentucky is #1, unfortunately, for having students with incarcerated parents. And we know when situations happen with kids like divorce. So, the fact that this picks up changes in household demographics and household size is kind of a proxy for picking up other changes that we know are contributing to risk and challenges students are undergoing. And it's also looking at things like enrollment history, the school type, are students in alternative programs, Title I programs, prior dropout, and it's looking at historical things. So on the Persistence to Graduation webpage, we have a handout that kind of goes into detail about what data elements are specifically being pulled. So I just wanted to talk a few more seconds about a couple of the other aspects of this that I think are really powerful. So if you remember in the PTG, it's looking at percent of grades, courses that students are failing. This is such a sensitive tool. It's actually picking up a different weight for, things that, so if a student's failing English, a core class in a particular grade, that weights more heavily than just looking at an overall percent of classes failing. So again, it's a very, very powerful tool in terms of behavior data. It's not just looking at in-school removal incidences. and suspensions. It's looking at all the behavior resolutions. It's taking into account number of days. So again, just pointing out, it's a very sensitive, powerful tool. In terms of the, this is remembering in the PTG, the scale is the inverse here, and it's a different scale. So whereas in the PTG tool, the higher your number, the higher your risk of dropping out, this is the inverse. So the higher your number, the higher your likelihood of graduating. And also the scale is 50 to 150. And we've talked about, you know, maybe this might not be as intuitive as a scale of 0 to 100, but the developers and the team thought, you know, we don't want a score to, it just might, you know, we don't want someone to say, well, student has a 50% chance of graduating. This is just, so the conversation's still ongoing, but this is the scale that it is. So the lowest student score can be is 50 and the highest is 150. And the awesome thing about this tool is that it's tailored to the unique environment of the district and the school. So where PTG is just flat out the same across every environment, we know environments are very different, student populations are very different. This is tailored to, this is picking up, it's sensitive to the context of the school. So basically, right now in Kentucky overall, our state average is 137 in terms of likelihood of graduating, and this is an overall average. And so a student with a higher grad score means that student shares more factors with past students in that particular school that have graduated. The lower score means a student has more risk factors, all those variables we talked about earlier, that's shared with past students in that particular school that have dropped out. So this predicts very well. It's the data analyst at Infinite Campus did you know, pulling in from using a large district, looking at the predictive power, and it did find that the early warning tool does a better job in terms of predicting who's going to graduate. But I do want to point out, going back thinking about those quiet dropouts, what this slide basically is showing is this is what you want to see. So, you know, the blue bar are students that did not drop out. And you see, you know, most of those students had a score of 150 that did show they had a very high likelihood of graduation. But, and the red bars are students that dropped out, and we see the majority of those did have the score of around 50. So we know that it's a good predictor. However, what I want to point out is that you do see red bars at the 150 range. So we do see students that did have a score that looked like there's no problem here, they're going to graduate, but they did drop out. Conversely, we also have students who had a score of 50 or around the 50 range that did not drop out. So, you know, really important in never looking at a score and making assumptions. And I know sometimes it's easy to lose hope and give up, but this is demonstrating we can never give up on any student. Everybody, you know, regardless of the score and the risk factors that they're facing, you know, has a chance, and we need to put our efforts there. So I'm going to, let's see. So this, okay, when you go to the early warning, and I'll show you the path on how to get there, this is a screen you're going to see. You're going to see the students' names, and the great thing about this is you can sort in Infinite Campus. So you can sort based on grade, gender, and awesome that you can also sort using your ad hoc reports, your ad hoc groups that you've created. You can filter for those. They also have now, you can save it as a Excel file, CSV, and you can also print this list. The other feature I want to point out is there's a watch list here on the left-hand column that you can click on particular students that you want to create a watch list for. Whether it's for a grade level team, for, you know, depending on how you're using this at a district or school level. So that's a really nice feature. All right, so when you click on a student's name, this is a screen that you're going to see. And you're going to see this is the particular student. And what I love about this screen is that no matter what student you click on, you immediately get to see the distribution of grad scores in your whole school. This is what my school looks like. So that's that hump right there. You can see in this particular school, the majority of students are, over, I'd say 125, in the 125 to 150 range, and you have very few students at the 50 to 75 range. That orange square there is looking at that particular individual student and where they are in the distribution of that school. So I think that's a very powerful visual right there. And a feature that they also added here is that at this point in the development of the tool, while it's great, it gives you a very robust score and likelihood of where a student's risk of dropping out. You do at this point have to go in kind of investigate what are the reasons why their score is what it is. So there's a hyperlink now button that you can go back into the students to investigate and, kind of look in their general Infinite Campus tab. They're looking at their history. But you can also, if you're, what a lot of schools, high schools are doing are using this interchangeably with the persistence to graduation report, which gives you those details of those basic three categories of attendance, grades, and behavior. So some of the cautions, really, really important. Some of our most transient students have the highest risk of dropout. And so you don't want to dismiss students that don't have a score. So when you run your early warning, you're going to see students that don't have a score. You do not want to dismiss those students because they could not just have enough data in the system to generate a score, but they could also be at the highest risk. Similarly, in thinking about the PTG, when you see students with a score of 0, 1, 2, again, you want to be cautious not to, this is just one of the tools in your belt. You want to be cautious because there might be an issue with data entry, occurring. A student might have a lot of behavior issues, but that particular school's not entering those referrals in the Infinite Campus system. And so it's not going to give that indicator. So again, it's just important that we focus on data quality, and also importantly, when students transfer, that we're considerate and making sure that we do those records transfers in a timely fashion. So some of the strengths, I think, it's again a very powerful, robust tool. It's using all the data that's in Infinite Campus that predicts. That dashboard, I think, is a great feature. You can see the distribution. I mean, if that's all you're using it for right now, go look at the distribution in your school. Use it to talk to your faculty and staff about where we are. Another great feature, you can filter in Infinite Campus, and you have those ad hoc groups you can filter with. And really importantly, again, it takes into consideration your specific school and district context. And you can run the report in IC anytime by multiple users. Some of the limitations, obviously, that it's only for high school is a limitation, but IC wanted to make sure they got it right and perfect for high school before moving to elementary and the middle. And so that's on the agenda down the road. Currently, a student needs at least 1 year of prior data in the system. Again, thinking about those transient students. And I think in terms of actionability, the second phase of development that they're working really hard on, once that's complete, it's going to be an extremely powerful tool for use by everybody in the schools. But right now, it doesn't give you those specific factors on why the student's grad score is what it is. You have to go and investigate each for yourself. So that's why, again, we have both of those tools up, and we think it's important to use simultaneously if you're in the high school. So here's a couple more developments. We know credit attainment's really critical, so IC's working on adding that as a feature. Looking at how many credits the students attained is a really important thing. Looking at having that specific student dashboard, and we have a district advisory committee. I really encourage you, if you're interested, we like to hear and work with people on the ground to help inform the development of this. So encourage you to, send me or Lisa Keeter an email if you're interested in being on that team. They're also working on customizable reports depending on what audience or who you're showing this information to, and then that expansion to the earlier grades. All right, how to get there is it's a totally different path than the persistence and graduation. So it's under student information, under counseling, and that's where the early warning. That's the path to get there. All users do at least need read tool rights to have access to the screen. I did talk with a group of Friskies who are a really critical group, and I know some of them expressed concern that in their particular site, they are not given access to some of the tools, and I think they're a really important group that has the capacity to do some intervention. So I think it's important also to consider.
I hate to interrupt you, but I'm going to, because I think that's a very good point, because the group you're talking to today is probably not a group that's actually using this report, but it is the group that is giving access to this report. So let's not lose this opportunity to talk a little bit about who should have access. How can the KSIS points of contact help principals, counselors, because you've done a lot of training out there. You've done training. You had a persistence to graduation summit, but not all districts get to travel, get to go to those things, and even when they go back and they go in to their system and they're like, well, I don't have access to that, and they get busy and forget about it. So there's things that KSIS points of contact can do. Run a version of it and give it to each of your principals. Let your counselors see that. If you've got a Frisky coordinator, make sure that you're in the meetings where you can talk about the availability of this report and provide an example. Even if you take, there's a lot of sensitive data on this. So be conscious of the fact that you don't want to just start passing it around, but like what's been done today where we've taken names off, you can talk about it, take the names off, find who the right people are that have that need to know for FERPA, and then you can make sure that you're turning it on for the right people, and the principals and counselors in the schools have that access they need to be able to see it. Because Kentucky's very fortunate in the fact that Infinite Campus has partnered with us on this. KDE doesn't have data scientists on staff. Those are a very expensive commodity. And it's not something that, it's easy to attract, at state agencies. So the fact that Infinite Campus does that, they actually work with the University of Minnesota, right?
Yeah, more process of it.
Yeah, so, they have some of their people on their staff actually work at University of Minnesota too, so that's a better probably way of saying it. So we have this expertise, and we've got this really new cool tool that can really help students. So we want to make sure that people have access to it and know about it, and the right people in the schools are looking at it. So I just didn't want to, I hate to interrupt you, but I kept kind of looking for somewhere to get in there, because sometimes we can tell KSIS points of contact and they're going, well, I'm not going to use this. But you all are critical into passing the information along. So we just want to make sure we put a plug in for that.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, because this was a group of Friskies. They really want to use it. They know and they have the capacity to help. And so, thank you for that. So in terms of which to use, you all are smart people, at the school level, the PTG, if you're elementary, middle, that's what you have right now at your disposal. And, to get the specific data points, around those indicators we talked about. If you're in high school, you want a more sensitive tool with a stronger predictive power, you're going to use early warning, but definitely referring to the PTG and doing your own investigation about why student scores are what they are. Again, careful with comparisons. These are two very different tools. There's some similarities, but you're going to see some differences because the early warning's picking up a lot that the PTG is not. So they're calculated very different. I won't go through this. This is basically a side-by-side indicator of the tools.
18 minutes, so you have time if you want to.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to get to the intervention part, but thank you. Yeah, so this is, again, just a side-by-side comparison of the two tools. But what will these tools not tell us? There's Brene Brown talks about stories are data with a soul. And so, these tools are looking at numbers, but one of the things that are some protective factors against some of these risk factors that a lot of our kids are facing are the strengths that they have, some of the character strengths. So one of the powerful approaches that, and it seems very simple, but it's a very powerful, and this could be a school-wide approach and also in individuals, really celebrating the other strengths of our students. So much focus, there's a lot of focus on academics and meeting benchmarks, and you can see, you go around schools sometimes and we see all the, students getting the gold stars and celebrations for meeting benchmark and getting proficient distinguished on K-Prep. But those students that they are working hard and for multiple reasons they're not meeting those benchmarks. But they also, all of our kids need to be celebrated for the other strengths as human beings that they have. And these are strengths that are protective factors. And so I think this is just a great site, the VIA character strengths. And I do see a lot of schools that do this, and it's really powerful. And it's very meaningful to students to see their name and to be celebrated. So that's just, I just wanted to point that out. Again, I think we've talked enough, don't rely on these as your only tools. But in some cases, these are the only tools available. And so we want to make sure that we disseminate these. Right now, they're not looking at credit attainment, so that's really important to keep in mind. And again, not forgetting the protective factors and the strengths of the students. All right. So just as was mentioned, look at all these role groups here that could use these tools in multiple ways. So we want to encourage use of these tools. Again, and I think pointing out the cautions and being really ethical and careful about how we use them, but they are important tools. So these are some of the ways that these tools can be used in a general sense, is looking at root cause. So we know students that are struggling with academics are also struggling with attendance or behavior. We know these are highly correlated and overlap, but looking at the root cause, we know, again, I think looking at experiences of persistent trauma that our kids are facing or life circumstances that are beyond their control, looking at root cause analysis and what is in our sphere of control that we can do to intervene as early as possible. So using that PTG in elementary is critical. Using it in middle school. I talked to someone yesterday actually that's using the tool with a team in their district. It's a smaller district, but what they're using the tools are to identify kids at risk in those critical transition points. So from 5th grade to 6th grade, getting those, who are the kids that are at high risk coming into my school in 6th grade, our new 9th graders. Very high risk year. And so those are how a small district is using that as a system. So obviously to determine appropriate supports and interventions, again, using things for positive reinforcement. So students that are on the right track, also using these tools to celebrate and positive motivation. Conversations with students, conversations with parents, conversations with staff, also good use of the tools. And I also want to point out, students, this is a mandate that they have their individual learning plan with career cruising. It's great, to use these tools in conjunction with that students middle through high school have to do. Importantly, with any data tool, I think a lot of our schools are really great at this. Some of them do struggle for many reasons, some beyond their control as well. But creating structures, processes, and plans. And I think one important thing is using these tools in the structure of a team is really critical. So while certain people and some people are using these tools in isolation within their role group, but the most powerful use is really within a team. So also, supplementing the current structures that you do have. For example, you might have a freshman advisory team. You might have a team working with your alternative programs. In your PLCs, these are great structures that might already exist in your school that you can use these tools in. Also, some people are actually using the tools to predict the scope of the intervention needs. So really using these at a school level and a district level, actually, depending on the size of your district, to look at the scope of needs and, planning how you're going to spend your money and the intervention, the scope of need you're going to have. So that's a great use of the tool. Kind of creating a tiered pyramid, using that PBIS model. If I have time, I might get to here, and mapping out what are the needs for your school and the potential realistic resources available to address them. So now, again, it's going back to a caution. This might feel a little bit out of place, but just questioning, being ethical and very careful about how you use this. So posing this question, would you show this graph? Again, this is a graph showing a student who's at very high risk of dropping out. And would you show this to a student or a parent? If a student's experienced failure over time and, parents have experienced their students failing and getting calls from schools, maybe they're struggling with multiple life circumstances. But in some cases, so the answer to this is really, it depends. Showing this to a student or a parent could really be detrimental and break a soul, but also depending on the student, this also might be motivational or, kind of a reality check for a student or for a parent. So just using your best judgment and making sure we're really thoughtful in how we use some of these. And again, IC's working to help provide customizable reports so that if you're a DPP and you're taking some of this information to court, you have the right tool. If you're presenting this to a group of parents or staff, you're using what's most appropriate for the role. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but okay, 10 minutes. So just going through quickly some snippets of, again, thinking about how we can support the whole student. And so looking at the interdependent dimensions of wellness and well-being for students, just wanting to point out that, we've, in the world of education, often because of NCLB and some of the mandates, we focus so much on the intellectual, developing that intellectual and the cognitive capacities, but just thinking about looking back at the research we talked about why students are dropping out and what areas do we need to help support students in. It's really the whole human being. How can we help students find that balance? And how are we assessing the needs? So there's a lot of great work going on with looking at universal screeners as a very good prevention mechanism. But again, tying back to the research, dropout prevention, again, this has been studied for decades, so we know interventions need to occur in multiple areas. So thinking about, do you have a dropout prevention team in your district or school, planning and looking at all these different dimensions of, the limited resources and capacity we have, where is the best place to kind of use our focus? But we're dealing with whole human beings that live in families and communities in the school context. There are many different areas that we can do interventions in. There's so much here to talk about in terms of effective strategies. So the National Dropout Prevention Center has done so much work in this, so I encourage you to look at the link. These are basically just the basic buckets of effective strategies that we know work. And so, again, having a team of people going in and looking at, what our needs are and what areas that we can focus on. I think we get overwhelmed because there's so much to do, but I think just picking one or two things that we're going to focus on this year is a really powerful approach. In the few minutes left, I do want to point out, just knowing the research, that you all are familiar with this tiered thing. So, I think looking at your students on the list and designating, based on using the tiered approach. But I want to point out a really powerful resource that has come is the CASEL. They have a district resource guide for improving culture and climate and social and emotional learning. And so I think we also know that having, that school-wide welcoming, healthy, positive school climate is such a powerful preventative mechanism and support for every student, regardless of what tier they are on. And oftentimes we spend a lot of time working on interventions for the targeted and intensive kids, which is really important. And sometimes we forget the power that we have in doing whole school activities and efforts. There's plenty of information practically on how you do that through the National School Climate Center and the CASEL. So I just want to point out the power in that. Attendance Works is a great resource as well. If you're this is just an example of how, if you decide you're going to focus on attendance issues, this is just kind of an example of how those things are broken out. But I do want to point out really quick, going back to this, just because I'm so excited about this most recent study that came out on social and emotional learning, looking at, it's a meta-analysis looking at 82 social and emotional learning interventions, following students that got those interventions at a school with students that did not, 6 months to 18 years after they got it. And what it found was a powerful effect sizes and statistically significant differences between the kids that got it on so many indicators. Outside of academics, actually had the strongest effect size, so social emotional learning. But it also impacted graduation rates. It impacted arrest rates. It impacted risk behaviors. So it's really powerful. And if I can pop the link in there to this most recent study, because I think it's something in education we really, really need to pay attention to. I might have like 1 or 2 minutes left. I don't know how much time, but
About 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. Another resource I want to point out, if you don't know this, What Works Clearinghouse is another really great tool to use. I kind of put a path to graduation, but all of these areas are very relevant. So I encourage you to explore this, because there are very high standards to get a particular intervention in the What Works Clearinghouse. It has to demonstrate effectiveness through empirical research. So, but there's a lot to explore in this What Works Clearinghouse in terms of looking at interventions. Also, What Works Clearinghouse has a best practice guide for dropout prevention. And what I really want to point out here is, we already talked about social and emotional skills, skill building, but also, one very cost-effective approach that is a recommended intervention and practice is assigning an advocate to students that are at risk. Taking your watch list and getting the highest risk kids, and also, again, paying attention to kids that might not have a score that are even at higher risk, but assigning each kid an adult that just checks in with them. When they're absent, when they come back, it's not the same without you. Just somebody that is showing care and concern for the student. There's a program in Colorado that's actually, because our adult availability is limited in some cases when you have a school full of kids at risk, we have students mentoring students, so being creative. But I think just having that human, person-to-person, is a cost-effective approach, and there's lots of strategies and practical things to take into consideration, but I encourage you to look at that program in Colorado, and also thinking about there's so much out there, and I know it can be overwhelming, but again, I think a team approach is really important, and using the data tools in conjunction. So in closing, there are a couple more resources that you can go to, Career and Technical Education, the Regional Educational Laboratory, and again, the National Dropout Prevention Center. And we also have our Persistence of Graduation webpage that is also in development, so we're making some improvements to that actually this week. So I encourage you to do that. And finally, we have this Kentucky Center for Education and Workforce Statistics. And in terms of giving students a reality check, I think this is another great local resource that we have that you can use with your students in talking about the realities of what the workforce is like. And, you know, it's another, I think, a great data portal to kind of explore with your students. And finally, again, if you are interested in being part of our district advisory group and giving your feedback and being part of the process, please send me an email. I'm in Global. And Donna Deal, she is our branch manager. She's also working on this as well with the team. Sorry. There's my email there. So you can email me or Donna if you're interested or if you have any additional questions.